Hello, my name's Clare Murray. I am Managing Partner of Specialist Employment, Partnership and Regulatory firm CM Murray, and I am absolutely delighted to be here today with my wonderful partner Merrill April. Hi Merrill.
Hi Claire, good to be here.
So we are here today to demystify, including for me, some of the changes to the UK listing rules. And the context for this is that you recently wrote a brilliant news alert for us, focusing on the changes that PLC directors needed to be aware of in the context of these listing rule changes. And I just thought it would be brilliant for us to have a discussion about this so I can learn more, and anyone who's interested in this area or is a director or an advisor to directors can just get some of the key elements and maybe then be encouraged to go and take a look at the rules themselves with that sort of starting knowledge. So I'm going to ask you, what's the current position on the listing rules, and I guess what's the motivation for the changes?
Thanks, Claire. There have been many factors, I think, but the listing rules are certainly one of those that have meant that the UK has become an unattractive jurisdiction for listing companies. So that is the present position. The statistics show there's been something like a 40% decline in companies listing on the UK stock market since the global financial crisis in 2008. So I'm really excited about the changes to these rules. They fundamentally affect investors, but they also obviously affect the management teams that are going to run those companies. And it gives lots more opportunities to senior executives. And that's why I'm excited about it, because companies should list in the UK. Management boards should be able to have confidence that that float will be successful, and that will give senior managers in the UK lots of opportunity.
Brilliant. Okay, so what are the maybe sort of 3 or 4 kind of big changes that you think will have a significant impact?
Yeah, one of those that caught my eye were the super voting powers for founders and directors. Because one of the barriers to listing, once a company's been through various rounds of funding and so on, and still wants to grow, is that fear of losing control of your business and your baby that you've grown. So I think by allowing directors to have super voting powers on certain operational decisions for that company going forward will be really reassuring to founders seeking to list on the stock market.
So what will then that mean in practice, kind of on the front line?
Yeah, so that will mean fewer barriers to, for example, making an acquisition of a company that will add to the portfolio. There are some protections for investors. So obviously, super voting powers cannot be used for directors to vote in their own interests on LTIPs, discounted options, and that sort of thing. But in terms of operational decisions, they will be able to get through issues that they want to do in order to progress the growth of the company.
So could they, for example, progress a significant acquisition?
Absolutely. So I think it was Tate and Lyle that recently did that. And so we're already seeing the impact of the rules in
So
a
that's
positive
quite
way.
exciting.
Yeah.
It is giving the board much more of a free hand to really grow a business, which clearly is what the government is focused on, and we in business we're all trying to focus on sort of on profitable growth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What are the other sort of big changes?
One of the other important things for growth, I think, is culture. As we know, we're always talking about culture in businesses, both positive and negative. And one of the changes in these rules is to promote, I guess, a beneficial culture. So currently there is an obligation to assess and monitor how you're doing in terms of your corporate culture. But the changes in these rules require you to show how you've embedded the culture and to show that in the annual report. So investors, members of the public, potential investors, everyone can see how you're doing, a snapshot in the annual report. And I haven't seen a lot of guidance about what this shift from assessing and monitoring to embedding will mean. But what I think it will mean is that you need specific examples and you need data and measurable results. And I think it's going to be incumbent on the HR director and that HR team to be working towards providing to the board those measurable results to show culture has been embedded.
And do you think it could make a significant impact, or it could have made a significant impact in the type of scenarios that we're seeing in the press at the moment, if they'd been listed companies and if these changes had been in place at that time?
I mean, I'm an optimist. I like to think that. I think if you're one of those directors on the board who are looking for tools to promote culture and, as you say, try to prevent a poor culture allowing poor behaviours to flourish, this gives you another tool to use to that advantage. So I'm hopeful. Yes.
That's interesting. Okay. Any other significant changes to flag?
There's a couple. One, I think, relates to diversity, and there's quite an interesting, quirky change within these rules, which seems initially counterintuitive because the list of diverse characteristics that you must consider when you're looking at evaluation of the board succession planning has been removed, which sounds like a backward step. But my understanding for the reason behind that is that that list was just restricted to those characteristics that we think of as being protected characteristics in the Equality Act. And there are important characteristics that are not yet covered by that act. And most importantly, in the context of boards, it's extremely important nowadays to look at the socio-economic background of your board and make sure it's reflective of your consumers, and also make sure that you're getting all that fresh input and ideas from people from different backgrounds. So I think this change means that when boards are considering recruitment, when they're evaluating themselves, and when they're looking at their succession plan, they can take into account, and indeed must take into account, or otherwise explain why not, a wider range of diverse characteristics. So again, I'm quite excited and optimistic about that will drive forward these important ESG agendas on the diversity piece.
And then what about the director in their own individual sort of capacity, in their own individual arrangements? Are there any changes in the listing rules that, they should be aware of?
Yes, I think the most important one relates to remuneration, which is always top of everyone's mind. So in these rules, the malus and clawback provisions must be specified, not just those that are in the service agreement, but those that are buried within the LTIPs and the other arrangements that make up the whole package. And one of the things we've seen a lot in the last year is where, for example, a private equity investor has cleared out the board, they're bringing in new directors, the CEO has an opportunity to negotiate for themselves and for their C-suite, their CIO, their CFO, CTO, etc., the new remuneration arrangements for the next phase of the company's growth. They will need to look really carefully at malus and clawback on entry and make sure that that operates fairly and within the rules. And also on exit, extremely important, because what we now see is non-executives acting for the company are trying to maybe impose an intermediate leaver status rather than a good leaver status. And also, the operation of malus and clawback may be different depending on the status, and may also be different depending on whether you're a current director or an exiting director. And what you want to try to achieve is obviously parity as an ex-director if malus and clawback is going to be imposed subsequently in the future, so that you're treated the same as those directors who are still within the business. So I think that's going to be a really important area of focus going forward.
Right, interesting, thank you. And what about issues within the business? I think, you've explained to me that there are changes in that regard and the options that are open to a director and what they might do. I just think it might be helpful to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, thanks. I was looking at provision 8, and that seems to give directors an opportunity if they either haven't felt able to use the whistleblowing process, or they have and it hasn't resolved the issue, or an investigation has happened, but recommendations haven't been implemented and they still have concerns, they can ask for their concerns to be minuted at the board level. And also a non-executive director on resignation can put a written statement into the chair. And then obviously the chair as the controller of the board really would have to think about what they needed to do with that written statement to try to deal with those issues. And also for the director, then I think they feel they've done what they can to protect themselves, to say, I raised this issue, here's my statement, and that would help them in any subsequent litigation, I think.
Yeah. So it seems to me to do, three things. One is it ensures escalation to the absolute top level of the company.
Mm.
Two, it makes it really difficult not to do anything about it if you're the board. And then three, it must give some additional assurance to the individual that they've maximised their own protections, they've made protected disclosures potentially, and that if there are any sort of adverse consequences, detrimental conduct, that it's going to be harder to argue that they haven't done that because they've made it very clear through like the most formal channels, institutionalized channels. That's really interesting. And do you think that that's a route that will be used?
I do, because directors are often in a conflicting situation. They have their board role, but they have their personal hat too. And sometimes they may feel that by raising something, they're pointing the finger at themselves. But when they leave, if their issue has not been resolved, they can now ask for that issue to be minuted. All their contributions will be there minuted. And also, if they put in a written statement to the chair on leaving, they give themselves a certain protection through having their voice heard and written down at a particular point in time, which is really important in litigation.
It's really interesting. And you might actually end up in someone having to weigh up what their preference is, because they might feel they have as a director an obligation to record these things. And then on the other hand, if they've actually got one eye to a negotiated settlement, they might prefer confidentiality, and they might see that as some form of let's call it a bargaining chip. So I think there'll maybe be commercial decisions that will have to be made by the individual, and whether their directorship obligation should always take priority.
I see your thinking there, and I agree. I think most directors are very principled and authentic, but can get very frustrated when their personal issues are not properly listened to. So there are opportunities there.
So just pulling all of that together, Meryl, if you are just looking at it from different perspectives, if you are a PLC director, or you're moving to a PLC director role, kind of what should you be thinking about, or what could you be thinking about now with these new rules, or in the wider context?
I think if you're moving to your first public company role, you definitely should be looking at the rules and seeing what is in there that can help you in the new sort of status. One thing that's really interesting is that although there are constraints within a public company and additional governance requirements, there is some understanding that it's a big leap from private to public. And the practical input of that is that whereas in a private company, you might have a long notice period, which gives you security and protection and leverage, and you may be being put under pressure to agree a 12-month notice period maximum, there is some leeway in the rules to allow you to have, for a transitional period, a longer than 12 months notice period. And that is something that's often overlooked and could be useful.
So, and if you are a director with concerns about the business, about the culture, about things going on, again, just briefly, what could they be thinking about practically?
I think they would be looking to see whether there's a whistleblowing policy that's in place and operational, maybe asking questions about investigations and whether those, if any, have taken place, if recommendations have been implemented. And finally, as we mentioned briefly earlier, there are now new provisions that enable you to get your voice heard and out there by having your concerns minuted at the board level.
Well, look, I've found that really interesting and very, very helpful. And you know, you are the person that I come to every time that I have any sort of question around the listing rules or PLC directors, because of your sort of huge background in this area, advising the UK PLCs and the directors themselves. So it's been really interesting for me. Thank you so much. I hope if you've reached the end of this video, you've enjoyed it and found it really helpful. Please do get in touch. We love talking about these things. Merrill is always very happy to have a chat informally, as well as obviously to advise. And yeah, we'd love it if you would like and share if you've enjoyed this video. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Thank you for staying with us, and hope to see you again soon. And thank you, Merrill. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.